Thomas Edmund William Gross was born on the 15th of March 1985. A son for Ed and Cheryl, and a younger brother for my sister Hayley and me. He was a much awaited boy. In fact, Dad went to Pizza Hut to celebrate his arrival, which was kind of a big deal in 1985, and my sister and I always note that he didn't go to Pizza Hut when we were born. As a child, Tom was athletic, funny, lots of friends, always had a love of water. But he was a little bit crazy as well. He gave Mum a lot of headaches. As a toddler, he thought he could fly over the bird bath, and it turns out that he absolutely couldn't. And he ran straight into it and knocked out a couple of teeth. On the 2nd of August 2010, at the age of 25, Tom was diagnosed with brain cancer. After that time, he was under the care of an incredible neurosurgeon, Dr. Santosh Panus. Dr. Panus performed 3 surgical resections on Tom, trying to give him the best opportunity to extend his life. I think he went into parts of the brain that he hadn't been before. I think that was a lot to do with the incredible relationship and respect that Dr. Panus and Tom had for one another. Tom was extremely stoic throughout his diagnosis and his illness. He managed to graduate as an engineer at the University of Adelaide, despite many people telling him that that was impossible. He went on to become a part of the graduate program at BHP, and he lived independently in Roxby Downs. We knew from the day that Tom was diagnosed that he would die from this disease. So the focus became about living well and also dying well. Tom was really good at the living well part. He didn't speak a lot about death, but he sure showed us how to live. Tom defied his prognosis and lived a lot longer than people thought he would. 7 years after his diagnosis, things started to get really hard for Tom. And that's when we met the team at Laurel Hospice. The first time we came to Laurel Hospice, Tom was in a really agitated space and state. My husband Kane and I brought him here. I guess I'd never thought of hospice care as something that you could do more than once. And at that time, it was to do a few things for Tom. It was to provide a safe space for him. It was to get his pain under control and his anxiety. I really believe that that earlier intervention of palliative care extended Tom's life. I think it gave us the gift of another Christmas. I think it gave Tom a better quality of life. And more importantly than anything was it reassured Tom that his wishes were being met. And his greatest wish at that time as a young man was really to continue to live independently. The second time at Laurel Hospice was a little bit different. He had achieved his wish of returning to live independently at Marion Bay, but this time he'd been flown back to Flinders Hospital via MedStar. In emergency, we didn't know if Tom was going to make it through that night or get the opportunity to even return to the safe space of Laurel Hospice. But Tom, being Tom and very determined, he decided to hang on. And we eventually did make it back to Laurel Hospice. Once again, even though we knew that we were at the final stages of Tom's life, and this had been a very long period, 8 years of grief really, and we were reaching the crescendo, we still shared really happy times here. We had family meals, pet therapy happened. Tom had a love of animals and dogs, and a dog visited him. Mum was able to stay with him. And there's probably nothing better than a mother's love when you're dying. My boys, who were very young at the time, it really normalised death for them. We didn't hide anything from them, or for my niece and nephew who were even younger. Mum and Dad spent, just countless hours here. My sister too. It gave him the chance for his family and friends. So many friends came from all over the place, even as far as overseas, to spend time with Tom in his final days. It goes against the grain to think that life can go on as normal when someone you love so much is in the process of dying. One particular person who has remained a very good friend of ours is Simon. And Simon is a young man who was Tom's main nurse. We met him the first time we came in, and and he continued to provide care throughout, including in Tom's final stages. One of the first times we met Simon, he shared with us that his brother had died of brain cancer. It was very generous of him to share that and to be so vulnerable. And he said to us, he assured us that he had been through this. He understood and he would provide, the very best care to Tom. There was just something very normal to their friendship. They're just two young men who got along very well and joked and laughed. We just consider Simon an angel, really, that he came into our lives when we needed him most. There were some miracles that happened here at Laurel Hospice. Tom was very much in his final stages, and I'd come one day after work really just expecting to see him quite sedentary in his bed. He was in his room with a great friend of ours, Damien, and Tom had heard on the grapevine that I had arrived. And I looked up and Damien was trying to support Tom down the corridor as Tom was scurrying towards me. And Damien said he heard you were here and there was nothing stopping him coming to see you. I was always told that visual of Tom walking and his determination to see me so close to my heart. And that's the kind of things that Laurel Hospice allows to happen for families. Other things that happened was that Tom, had a final fist pump goodbye with my boys. He was unconscious at that stage, but they had the opportunity to say goodbye to him. They always did a little fist pump instead of a high five. We were all able to be with Tom when he died. And probably the thing that really reaffirmed my spirituality and belief that there is something far greater than all of us is that the night before Tom died, the nurse who we'd never met before was just this most striking resemblance of my paternal grandmother, Mari. You could not find someone who looked more like her. And we just all noticed it. And for me, that was a symbol that Tom was returning home and he would be greeted by people that love him and he would be safe. Me being me, thought I'm just going to test the theory a little bit. And I said to the nurse, "What did you get up to on the weekend?" She said, "I've got to show you, I was in my garden. I have the most amazing roses." That's when everything was just reaffirmed for me, because my grandmother Mari, her biggest thing was her garden and these big, fat, fluffy roses. The image that the nurse showed us were just identical to what Mari grew in her own garden. Laurel Hospice allowed us to prepare as best as we could for losing Tom. You can really never brace yourself for it, even though we had such a long time to get used to the idea that Tom was going to die. But really they supported us, spiritually and emotionally, and they just provided this safe space for us. The thing that I struggle with most with losing Tom is that we had to respect his wish that he didn't want to talk about dying. He was so focused on living. I think he did that to protect us as his family. He was particularly concerned about upsetting Dad and more so Mum. I think he just really struggled with that conversation and he felt guilty for the pain that he was causing her. There was one gift that Tom left me, and it was a conversation that we had when he was still living in Marion Bay. He'd had a surfing accident. This was really not very long at all before he died. And he had a near-death experience. His foot got caught on the reef and he couldn't resurface. And he was basically starved of oxygen. And he said to me, the feeling was euphoric. I really had to fight. I had to make a decision to come back. He said the pull was just so strong and it just felt incredible. And what I take from that conversation was Tom gave that to me because I know that he is now in that euphoric state, in a bright light. I believe that, we're only separated by a very thin veil, and he has a profound influence on all of our lives and will forevermore. I think the thing I would say is that gift has been so comforting for me. I think talking about death gives people who are dying the opportunity to have a better death, but it also provides so much comfort for those left behind.